You had a chance to meet with Premier Li Qiang at the China Development Forum, where we were both there. It's a really strategic time for China to navigate what's happening abroad with the tariffs and also restore confidence in domestic consumption and the property sector and the local economy. What was your reading coming out of the China Development Forum and your meeting with Li Qiang about the end demand for steel, which there's an oversupply, and how that leads to property recovery eventually?
I think that China's message that it's going to stay the course, it's very serious about building its economy, about increasing the health, the welfare, the living standards of its people as quickly and as sustainably as it can, is probably a good message for all of us. We've got very deep fragmentation happening in the world. I think that's a very bad thing. I think the world should be a collaborative world, but you've got Europe carving itself off into Europe. You've got Canada wondering about its own existence. Attitudes are changing everywhere. This is not a great trend. Tariffs everywhere, not a great trend. It's a sugar hit, but after the sugar hit, Steve, what then?
Yeah, what then? Because we have more tariffs potentially coming. On the copper front, I know you're mostly iron ore, but we've talked in the past about moving into some copper assets, also lithium and rare earth to diversify away. The Chinese slump continues in iron ore in the property sector, obviously, because new home starts in January and February, the lowest in the lowest in 2 decades. So it's still a slump here. But in copper, would you be cautious right now going into copper, or would you want to go a little bit quicker because of the enthusiasm we're seeing, at least in the U.S. futures market right now?
Yeah, look, I'm not going to be taking bets because of tariffs. When, I mean, any economist who's worth half his salt is going to tell you tariffs is what drove the Great Recession in the 1930s. I mean, it seems a really good idea politically for a very short time, and then you realize as your economy gets dragged down, as your own consumption falls away, as your demand for other nations' products falls away as a result, the global economy starts to stagnate. This is just what happened in the 1930s. Look, I'm not going to follow through on that and make a sugar hit decision. Oh, we've got small oceans of copper, let's suddenly commercialise them. No, when there's long-term demand trends, when copper is rare, when rare earths are rare, I can assure you there's nothing rare about rare earths. You know, they're a processing challenge. I can show you tens of kilometres of strike lengths of our rare earths, but will we commercialise them? That depends on downstream processing.
So what would be your long-term copper strategy? I know Mr. Henry was at the China Development Forum. He talked about, BHP is going further into copper, not necessarily away from iron ore, but just adding that.
Yeah, no, I really like what BHP is doing. I think they need to. We will continue to build up that very large copper option, which Fortescue has within its own asset base. We see a world where it's going to wake up later in this decade that climate change is accelerating at an accelerating rate. It's here to stay. All the hot air coming out of governments, climate isn't listening. Climate doesn't care what you say. It doesn't read the papers. And we will be impacted more and more by climate change. And so I'm seeing, look, very short-term policies, trying to wish it away. It doesn't wish anything away. And when the world wakes up, you'll see a very serious move back into green. And that's wise. I mean, if you're here for humanity, if you're here for organic life, you're going to be listening to the climate.
What have you been seeing as far as trade flows in the ferrous markets, given all the talk about the steel tariffs that we've had out of the White House? Look,
things are consolidating. I don't see big drops in long-term demand shifts. I see still a huge demand coming out of China. I see the cry across the world for green steel. I see the cry across the world for green energy. I have people saying, I'm worried about consuming, I'm worried about flying, I'm worried about building my house because I don't want to contribute to the pollution problem. Well, that's because of incredibly clever and devious marketing of the fossil fuel sector, which is trying to say, hey, we're all responsible, which is code for no one's responsible, not me, the fossil fuel sector, who's of course responsible.
Well, you're saying big energy is getting it all wrong.
Yeah, look, and you're not giving consumers a choice. So I'm saying, hey, iron ore, hey, steel, hey, big energy, hey, big fossil fuel, all you big industrialists, you're the people at fault. I'm the person at fault. We have to change. We have to go green. We have to give consumers a choice. Don't tell me that people are going to destroy the planet with plastic out of choice. No, we're not giving them any choice. When every bit of consumer product is presented in plastic, you have to consume it. That's the industrialist's fault, not the consumer.
Well, what's going to be your long-term plan then for green hydrogen? Because you had to pull back from that last year and also the beginning part of the year.
I used to say that that's a crap politician statement.
Well, then explain it to me, because the first couple of months, what's your read from the Trump White House on renewables and how it relates to your investments in green hydrogen?
So we consolidated Fortescue Energy and Fortescue Metals into one. That led to layoffs, okay? About 700 people. At the same time, we acknowledged that the demand for green hydrogen had disappeared because of the very slick marketing I've spoken about by fossil fuel. You know, and there's bots, hundreds of millions of bots going to Midwest America, Midwest or Middle Europe and saying, you know, there's a war in Europe and there's a war in the Middle East. Now is not the time to change to something which is new and better altogether. You've got to stick with what you know. And that's worked. So, but you can't fool all the people all the time, only all the people some of the time. Okay, so that'll only work for a short while. Then the world's going to say, hey, is there a source of energy which we can transport and use? And yes, it's green hydrogen. So Fortescue has doubled down on green hydrogen. We're excited with its future. We are not stepping back. And any idiot politician who says otherwise just needs to talk to me on camera.
Now, I know you have a distinct interest in, obviously, what's happening in Ukraine, personally, as well as through your philanthropic Minderoo Foundation providing humanitarian aid. Are you encouraged by the winds of truce, Black Sea truce right now, and that the peace process is going forward, or are you very skeptical that U.S. and Russia can help broker a lasting peace?
Well, when one side's picked the fight entirely, I'm kind of skeptical. What I can say is this: we're not in love with any particular side or ideology. What we're totally in love with is peace and harmony in human nature. When we see borders get transgressed simply because one side is bigger and uglier than the other side, then we think that's wrong, and we think it leads to an unsafe world for our children and everyone's children. So we certainly, as the Minderoo Foundation, object to that. We want a fair world. And that's why we've pushed hard back against Russia. We've gone completely pro-Ukraine because the people of Ukraine deserve to make their own choices. And when some idiot politician says, oh, you know, they all speak Russian, therefore they want to be Russian. No, that's because you put a gun to their parents' head and said, you'll make sure your kids speak Russian or else. Now, that's not a peaceful way. That's not a sustainable way. You need to give people freedom. Freedom to say no. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be in politics because you're not a leader. You're a dictator.